So we've all heard the excuse many times, but they had a rough childhood. They just didn't know any better. They didn't learn any better. Actually, I feel sorry for them. We've all heard this a million times. And I'm going to tell you, empathy is a beautiful thing. I'm not telling you not to be compassionate about this. It is important to try to understand someone, to figure out where they're coming from, but at some point, we have to ask, how far does this excuse really go? I mean, in reality, if someone had a rough childhood and they shoplift, guess what? They still go to jail. If they grew up without good role models and they're speeding down the highway, the cop is still going to give them a ticket. Okay, the cop's not going to say, "Oh, you poor thing, carry on." I mean, just imagine this for a minute. The cop chases them down, lights blaring, pulls them over, comes up to the window, and says, "Sir, do you know how fast you were going?" Well, could you imagine the look on his face if the response he got was, "Well, officer, my dad yelled a lot, and I never really learned how to, regulate my emotions or to follow speed limits." Just imagine the look on the cop's face. And if he continues and says, "Well, my dad was a horrible road rager. In fact, I was terrified for my life. It really traumatized me." Well, this officer is not gonna, nod sympathetically at him and say, "Oh, totally understandable. Trauma's tough, man. You drive safe now," and let him off the hook. That's just not going to happen. If they're speeding, they're still going to get the speeding ticket. If they're shoplifting, they're still going to go to jail. Welcome back to the Covert Narcissism Podcast, where we call out the excuses, cut through the confusion, and remind you that trauma is not a free pass to treat people like garbage. Now, I want to start by saying compassion matters. It does. Okay? I value compassion. Our world needs compassion. I'm not saying don't have compassion. But compassion is not a get out of jail free card. You see, everyone's got a story. We all do. There's a lot of people that had awful childhoods, neglect, trauma, abuse. And there's a lot of people with awful childhoods that still grow into kind, self-aware, and accountable adults. There's a lot of people that I work with that had tough childhoods, full of emotional neglect, narcissistic parenting, alcoholic family members. We're surrounded by a ton of this. But yet, these are people that stand here today with compassion and empathy and growth, vulnerability, self-reflection, trust. A rough childhood might explain why someone struggles, but it does not explain why they don't do the work. That's the problem. The problem is not that they struggle. The problem is that they don't do the work. Look at the work you're doing. Look at the amount of time you spend learning and researching. You're listening to a podcast on covert narcissism. Okay? You're showing up for life. Did you have a rough childhood? I'm sure many of you did. But this is about doing the work, showing up and growing up emotionally. Just because they have a rough childhood, it does not justify how they treat others today. Now, here's a difference that I want to put on the table here. People who genuinely want to grow acknowledge their wounds. They say things like, "I know I can be defensive. I learned that in my childhood, but I am working on that." Or they might say, "I tend to withdraw when I feel unsafe. I don't want to do that to you." But a covert narcissist, no, they don't do this. They weaponize that same self-awareness. They might say, "You know my past. I know I can be defensive. You know what I've been through. How can you bring that up right now? You're so cruel." That's not growth. That's guilt tripping disguised as vulnerability. They can put on the show of being vulnerable. "Oh, but my childhood, it was so rough and all the things I went through." But then they throw it at you. They weaponize it at you and say, "How can you be so mean?" when you're trying to hold them accountable for their own growth. Someone who might struggle financially, they have to work harder at finances. Like if they aren't responsible financially, then they need to put effort in that category, that direction, and work on their, financial, being able to balance their checkbook and work on their finances. Someone else might struggle with their weight. Well, what do they work on? They work on their health. Okay. They might work on their diet or work on exercising. You find, people who are self reflective, you find what you need to work on and you work on it. Some of us struggle with people pleasing or over promising our time and energy. So we work on learning to set boundaries. Well, narcissistic people, they struggle with a lack of empathy. They struggle with speaking too harshly, being defensive, passing the blame, all of these things. But they don't work on it. A lot of covert narcissists use their past trauma and their past pain like a permission slip. They'll say, see, this is why I am the way I am. And the list of excuses is endless. My parents fought a lot. My mom never hugged me. My dad was too strict. My ex was toxic. I had a bad breakup in college. I was under a lot of stress. I didn't get enough sleep. And my coworker looked at me wrong. My neighbor's dog died. Mercury's in retrograde. I mean, seriously? There's always a reason. And it's never their fault. They'll trace every outburst, every insult, every cruel silence back to some tragic event that supposedly justifies it. But meanwhile, you're over here apologizing for how you reacted to their latest emotional explosion. You're the one carrying all the emotional weight in the relationship because they had a rough childhood. Well, you know what? Maybe you did too. But you showed up for life. You learned. You grew. We all have baggage. We all have suitcases full of pain, mistreatment, injustice, neglect, failed relationships, and so on. The difference is some people carry their suitcases responsibly, taking care of their stuff, not spilling it all over everyone else. But others use their suitcases to beat people with. And this just isn't okay. Healthy people, they open their suitcase, they sort through it, they fold what's worth keeping, and they throw out the trash. Okay, that's what we do with emotional growth. But covert narcissists, they throw the suitcase at whoever's closest to them. The targets are the people that are the closest. And then they say, you made me drop that. The question I ask is not, what did you go through that brought you here? It's, what are you doing about it? And when you're dealing with a covert narcissist, the answer is absolutely nothing except blaming it on you, on everyone and everything around you. You can hold space for their story, but you don't have to live in it. And here's where things get even trickier. Because once we stop accepting that they just had a hard life as an excuse, another one shows up right behind it. They just don't know any better. And if they don't know any better, how can I hold them accountable? I used to think, well, if he doesn't understand what I'm asking of him, how can I be upset? I can't tell you how many times I've heard this excuse or this justification from the people I work with. And it sounds gentle and understanding. They just don't know any better. It sounds very emotionally attuned to be seeing their innocence in this. But here's the problem. Most of these people absolutely do know better. They just choose differently. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about right now. When you find yourself saying, well, they just don't know any better, take a pause for a minute and ask yourself, really? Do they really not know any better? Do they know how to talk to their boss? Do they know not to talk to their boss this way? Do they know not to insult their neighbor, at least not to their face? Do they know how to turn on the charm for a pastor, a therapist, your family, their family, the neighbors? It's amazing how not knowing any better magically disappears the second that they're in public. That's not innocence. That's calculation. They know exactly which buttons to press and when. They just call it accidental when it hurts you. I mean, they'll say things like, well, I didn't mean to. You're just too sensitive, or I was just joking. So no, they're not clueless. They're strategic. They know better. They just do worse. Jenna once told me, I kept defending him. He grew up with chaos. His dad drank, his mom screamed. He didn't learn how to communicate, and I wanted to help him. I wanted to help him learn and grow. But then one night, they were at dinner with friends, and she watched him. She watched him joke with them. He listened to them. He stayed calm. He was charming for 2 hours straight. So when they got home, she mentioned that. She said, "Hey, I was proud of you for being so relaxed and enjoying your time with them." He sneered at her and said, "Well, I actually like them." That's when it hit her. His inability was not inability at all. It was selective. This is one of the most painful realizations that survivors face. Realizing that the empathy, the patience, and the self-control or the self-reflection that you are begging for, that it actually does exist, just not for you. It's not that they can't do better, it's that they won't. Because they don't see you as someone that they need to, what? To impress anymore? So you've become their safe dumping ground. When you start thinking that they don't know any better, watch how they behave in public. How do they treat others publicly? How do they treat you publicly? They know more than we think they do. Now, once you start seeing the pattern, how they do better but simply choose not to, or they choose when to behave and when not to, once you start seeing that pattern, you can't unsee it. It's like realizing the magician's trick, and suddenly all those "I didn't mean to" moments, they look a lot less like accidents and a lot more like strategy. Once that curtain's pulled back, you can't unsee any of this anymore, and the next question becomes, okay, so what now? What's the standard now? What does accountability actually look like now? So let's take that idea, and I'm going to turn it all the way up. Because if bad childhoods were legitimate excuses, okay, if this really did justify adult behavior, I mean, what would our courtrooms look like? What would the justice system look like? Imagine a courtroom where their defense attorney is saying, "Well, Your Honor, I know my client did rob that bank. Yeah, we're going to plead guilty to robbing the bank, but please understand, his mom once grounded him unfairly. He had a really rough childhood." Can you imagine a judge saying, "Oh, well, in that case, this is dismissed. Clearly, this was just unresolved childhood trauma." No, if he robbed a bank, he's going to go to jail. That is how this works. That's called adult responsibility. And it is no different than the emotional excuses that you're dealing with in your relationship. It is no different than them saying, "Well, I know I just yelled at you, or I just threw a chair across the room, or I just blamed everything on you. But, I had a rough childhood." And you're going, "All right, case dismissed. Yeah, I'm sure they didn't mean to. They'll do better next time." That's the absurdity that we're dealing with here. In these relationships, we swallow the guilt for their behavior. We think, "Well, if I can just love them enough, then maybe someday this will get better. Maybe they'll change." That's not how accountability works. Their pain might explain their behavior, but you didn't cause it and you can't fix it. Meanwhile, they're cycling through their greatest hits. "I was triggered. You know how my anxiety gets. Mercury's in retrograde." Sure, and next week it'll be because the cat looked at you judgmentally? All they are doing is using your empathy as both a shield and a sword. Accountability means taking ownership without excuses. It means saying, "Yes, my past was hard. Yes, I hurt you, and that's on me." And if you've never heard words like that from them, then you are not in a relationship that's healing. You are in a relationship that's destructive. You're in a relationship that's hiding from the truth and hiding behind all the excuses. At some point, we have to stop accepting emotional crime scenes being explained away by their past or their present or the cosmic weather reports or whatever it is. Accountability is not punishment. You're not punishing them. Accountability is necessary for growth. It's not about rubbing their mistakes in their face. It's not about, discarding their childhood and everything that they're going through or they went through. It's about asking, what are you doing with your pain? Because everyone has pain. The difference is what you do with it. Some people use it as motivation to heal. Others use it as justification to harm. And when you point that out to a covert narcissist, instead of reflection, you get deflection. Instead of change, you get blame. So let's talk about what real growth would look like and what they could be doing if they actually wanted to heal. Having trauma is not the problem. Refusing to heal it is the problem. If they were truly unaware of the effect of this pain, the effect of their past, and they truly cared about you and all the words that you're saying to them, all the times you're trying to communicate with them, then they would be doing something about it. They would be in therapy. They would be journaling, apologizing, reading books, listening to podcasts, all the things that you're doing. Why? Because you care. They would be doing something. But when you bring it up, they flip it on you. You're so cold. You're so mean. You don't understand me. You don't know what it was like to grow up like I did. I'm the real victim here. It's like they've built a fortress of pain and expect you to live inside it with them forever. Meanwhile, millions of survivors of horrific childhoods are out there breaking that cycle. They're out there apologizing to their kids. They're out there learning emotional regulation. They're out there going to therapy instead of weaponizing their trauma. So pause for a moment and just ask yourself, are they showing effort or just excuses? Are they growing or just performing remorse long enough for you to calm down? Are they saying, I'm sorry, or I'm sorry you feel that way? One shows humility and the other shows manipulation. So yes, they had a rough childhood. They had a rough past. I get that. And I have compassion for that. But that does not make your suffering at their hands okay. It does not make it an excuse to treat people like emotional punching bags. It is okay to have compassion for them. And in fact, I encourage it. Our world needs compassion. But do not confuse compassion with obligation. You can care about someone's pain without sacrificing yourself to it. Compassion means understanding. It does not mean fixing or excusing. You can have empathy without surrender. You can see someone's pain and still say, you don't get to take that out on me. Compassion without boundaries is self-destruction. When your empathy has no guardrails, it becomes a weapon, just not in your hands. It actually gets turned against you. It's a weapon in their hands. What starts as kindness slowly erodes into exhaustion. You find yourself explaining away cruelty, absorbing blame, and calling it love. You begin to mistake tolerance for strength, endurance for connection. True compassion holds space for another person's pain and honors your own limits. It says, I see your suffering, but I won't let it consume me. Without that boundary, your empathy stops healing and actually starts harming the very person that it's meant to protect, which is you. When you finally draw that line, it doesn't make you heartless. It makes you healthy. Because the truth is, boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks. You decide who gets access and under what condition. And not everyone deserves unlimited entry just because they are hurting, because they had a rough childhood. I promise you, you can love people deeply while still saying this is not okay. Their story might explain their behavior, but it doesn't excuse their choices. When you start protecting your compassion, everything begins to change. This is the beginning of your healing. You stop confusing guilt with empathy. You stop mistaking silence for peace. And slowly, you start coming home to yourself. It's not about shutting your heart down. It's about learning who's got the right to have access to it. And that right there is where your healing really begins. I wish you so much peace on your journey of healing. The information provided by Renee Swanson, Covert Narcissism Podcast, and CNG Life Coaching is for educational purposes only and is not to be used for diagnosis purposes. It is not intended to be a substitute for clinical care. Please consult a healthcare provider for guidance specific to your case. This material discusses narcissism in general. Renee shares stories from her personal experience as well as from those that she has worked with for several years. Her material does not claim that any specific person has narcissism and should not be used to refer to any specific person as having narcissism. Permission is not granted to link to or repost this material to support an allegation or support a claim that any specific person is a narcissist. That would be an unauthorized misuse of the material and the information provided. Thank you.